May 17, 1943. 12:28 a.m. Mohn Valley, Germany. The reservoir lies below like a sheet of ink, perfectly still, almost polite. A dark mirror cradled between wooded slopes. Then, out of the night, a 4-engine shadow slides over the treetops so low you can feel the air tearing at the leaves. Inside the Lancaster, the world is vibration and breath. The cockpit is dim red. Dials tremble. The wind noise is a constant, hungry roar that never lets you forget how thin the margin is at this height. Wing Commander Guy Gibson keeps his hands light on the controls, but his jaw is locked so tight it looks painful. Every few seconds his eyes flick down to the altimeter, then out again, forward into blackness. The dam is somewhere ahead. A concrete spine across the valley. A target that shouldn't be possible. Behind Gibson, in the belly of the aircraft, men are hunched over their jobs like monks at an altar. The bomb aimer lies prone, face pressed to glass, searching for a shape that doesn't want to be found. The navigator stares at his charts and instruments, trying to pin an invisible needle onto an invisible map. The wireless operator listens to the night, to clipped voices and static and the soft panic hidden in professional tones. And down beneath them, bolted into the bomb bay like something stolen from a madman's sketchbook, hangs the weapon. A cylinder. A spinning drum. A bomb that doesn't fall like a bomb. It's called upkeep, but everyone who has seen it in daylight knows what it looks like. Not a miracle. Not a masterpiece. A cartoon. You can almost hear the laughter that must have followed Barnes Wallis through the corridors at first. The way men in uniforms smile politely when they think they're humoring a dreamer. The way they say, yes of course, and mean, not a chance. But tonight nobody is laughing. Tonight, the Lancaster is flying so low that the dark water seems close enough to touch, and the dam is a shadow that grows larger with every second. Gibson leans forward. The intercom crackles alive. Stand by. A simple phrase. Come. Ordinary. But it tightens every throat in the aircraft. Because standing by means one thing, they have reached the point where the plan stops being theory. And becomes gravity. The reservoir rushes beneath them now, the Lancaster skimming at about 60 feet, fast enough that the water's surface blurs. It's an unnatural sensation like being inside a fast-moving train that has somehow derailed into open air. The engines beat in a steady rhythm, 4 hearts hammering in sync. Any mistake here, any gust, any unseen rise in the terrain, and the night would swallow them whole. Then the first searchlight snaps on. A white blade cuts upward, probing. It misses them by yards, then swings back, hunting. A second light joins it. Then a third. And suddenly the calm reservoir becomes a stage, and the Lancasters are actors who have just stepped into the spotlight. Flak begins as distant popping. Like someone breaking sticks in the dark. Then it turns into something else, something heavier. Black puffs blossom in the air around them, violent flowers that shake the cockpit with blunt shock waves. You can feel it in your teeth. The gunner's voice comes sharp over the intercom. Flak. Port side. Gibson doesn't answer. He doesn't need to. He can see it. He can feel the aircraft buck as concussion slaps the fuselage. Somewhere behind him, metal ticks as fragments hit skin. The dam appears at last. A darker line ahead, rising out of the valley like a wall built to stop the world. The Mohne Dam is massive even in daylight. At night it's worse. It feels alive like a thing watching you come. And then, just as Wallis promised, the reservoir becomes a measuring device. 2 spotlights mounted under the Lancaster are angled so that, at the correct height, their beams meet on the water in a single bright oval. Too high and the beams separate. Too low and they overlap. Tonight, those twin circles of light tremble and slide across the black surface, and the crew watches them with the devotion of gamblers reading the turn of a card. Hold it, the bomb aimer whispers as if the aircraft can hear him. Because the bomb does not forgive. Upkeep must be released at the exact height, the exact distance, the exact speed. It must strike the water and skip like a stone. It must bounce over the torpedo nets. It must slam into the dam wall and sink against it, pressed there by its backspin, before it detonates underwater where the pressure will do what explosives alone cannot. That's the idea. That's the cartoon. And if it fails, this isn't a missed shot. This is men dying in a German valley, and the rest of the squadron flying into a storm for nothing. Gibson steadies the Lancaster, lining up with the dam. He is so low that the hills on either side feel close enough to reach out and claw at the wings. The flak is thicker now, more accurate. German gunners have found the rhythm of the approach. You can sense them adjusting, correcting, learning. The bomb aimer calls out the range, voice rising with urgency. Steady, steady. The dam grows huge in the windscreen. And then the night erupts with tracer fire. Thin red lines streak upward, arcing toward the Lancaster like furious insects. The cockpit glass flashes as rounds whip past. One strikes somewhere along the fuselage with a sound like a hammer blow, and the aircraft shudders, but Gibson keeps it straight. He keeps it straight because this is the only moment that matters. Now, the bomb aimer breathes. A switch is thrown. There's a subtle, almost gentle lurch as the weight leaves the aircraft. And in that instant, the cartoon drops away into the darkness. Nobody in the Lancaster can see it clearly. They only see the bright smear of spotlights on the water and the looming dam ahead. They listen for something they can't control anymore. Will it skip? Will it bite into the surface and vanish? Will it bounce again and again, marching toward the concrete like it was built for this? Or will it strike wrong, explode early, and turn the reservoir into their grave? The Lancaster surges forward, past the dam line into the black beyond. Behind them, the men strain to look back through tiny windows. And then the night flashes white. Not an explosion yet. Not the final thunder. Just a brief, impossible gleam off the water. As if something down there just bounced. The white flash on the water is real. For a heartbeat, it looks almost delicate, like moonlight flicked upward by a skipping stone. Then it becomes violent. A burst of spray and glare as upkeep bites the reservoir, rebounds, and runs forward across the surface with that unnatural backward spin that Barnes Wallace insisted on. It isn't sliding. It isn't floating. It's charging. Inside Gibson's Lancaster, nobody speaks. The intercom goes quiet in that way it only does when men are watching something they can't influence anymore. You can almost feel each crewman holding his breath at the same time, waiting for the next flash, the next bounce, the moment the bomb either behaves like physics, or betrays them. The dam swallows the last of it. A dull, underwater thump rolls up through the valley. Not the crack of a normal bomb. More like a giant fist hitting the base of the earth. The Mohne Dam doesn't explode. It simply absorbs it. For a second, Gibson's crew stares into the dark, searching for the impossible sight they came for. A fracture line, a sag, a sudden whitening of concrete. Nothing. The dam is still there. The searchlights swing back again, furious now, and the flak thickens as if the gunners have smelled blood. Gibson doesn't linger. He banks away hard, the Lancaster's wings tilting low over the black reservoir, and the aircraft claws for a sliver of darkness beyond the lights. Then Gibson does something that feels insane if you're watching from the ground. He comes back. Not to drop another bomb. He doesn't have one. He comes back to lead the next man in. He flies a circuit at low level, drawing the flak, dragging the searchlights away from the approach like a matador tugging a bull's attention at the last possible moment. Because behind him, another Lancaster is lining up for its run. Flight Lieutenant John Hoppy Hopgood brings his aircraft in so low the water seems to rise toward him. The spotlights under his fuselage tremble on the reservoir, trying to meet in that one perfect oval that means 60 feet. The dam fills his windscreen. The flak is waiting. It's waiting like it's been trained on this exact piece of sky. The German gunners have found the angle now. Tracer reaches up in long red fingers. The Lancaster shudders. A strike hits, then another. Somewhere inside, metal screams. For a moment, Hopgood's aircraft looks like it might break apart mid-approach. And still, he holds it. The bomb drops. Upkeep hits the water, begins its skips, and for a second you think you're watching the plan finally work. Then the bomb bounces too far. It sails over the dam's crest and detonates beyond it, the explosion flashing against structures below like a wrong answer shouted at the top of your lungs. Hopgood's Lancaster staggers away, badly hurt, barely alive in the air. You don't need a report to know what that means. You can hear it in the way Gibson's voice goes tight when he calls the next man forward. There's no time for grief. Not here. The dam is still standing. And the clock is bleeding away. Now it's Flight Lieutenant H.B. Mickey Martin. Australian. Calm hands. A voice that doesn't crack when it should. He lines up through the same murderous corridor of light and flak, and Gibson again throws his own aircraft across the dam to pull fire away at the last second. Martin releases. Upkeep skips. Once. Twice. 3 times like it's counting. The underwater detonation hits the dam and the valley answers with a low, rolling boom. The dam trembles. Gibson thinks he sees it, a faint movement, a slight distortion in the line of concrete. The kind of thing you could imagine if you wanted it badly enough. But it holds. And now you can feel something else creeping in, something colder than fear. The thought, what if the men who laughed were right? What if this spinning drum really is a cartoon? Because this is not a normal raid where you can drop your load and run and let tonnage do the rest. This is surgery performed at 232 miles an hour, 60 feet above a lake under point-blank fire. Every aircraft must take its turn, one by one, flying the same path, through the same cone of death. The 4th Lancaster swings into position. Squadron leader Henry Dingy Young brings his aircraft down to the waterline. His crew is doing the same quiet rituals. Altimeter checks, light beams meeting, bomb aimer whispering ranges like a prayer. He goes in. Flak bursts around him so close you can see the black puffs illuminated from within. Searchlights crawl across his fuselage, pinning him like an insect. And still he holds the line, still he doesn't climb, still he doesn't flinch. Upkeep releases. It hits the reservoir and skips in clean, confident leaps toward the dam wall. This time the detonation looks different. The sound is heavier. The water seems to jump. And the dam, again, doesn't fall but it changes. The line of concrete is no longer perfect. The surface looks bruised, wounded, as if the wall has finally begun to understand it can be hurt. Gibson sees it. He believes it. He calls the next man. Flight Lieutenant David Maltby brings Lancaster AJJ in, and you can almost sense every surviving crew in the air leaning toward him, willing his hands to stay steady. This is the 5th attack. The 5th time men have threaded the needle. The 5th time the flak has had a chance to correct its aim. Maltby goes low. Lower than feels sane. The spotlights meet on the water, one bright oval, dancing as the aircraft shudders. The dam fills everything. The tracer is a net thrown upward. Somewhere behind, a gunner is firing, but it feels futile, like shouting at a storm. Release. Upkeep drops, strikes, skips. The last bounce brings it into the wall. The bomb vanishes into darkness at the base, driven down by its own backspin exactly as Wallace promised. Then the valley holds its breath. The underwater explosion hits like a sledgehammer under the ribs of the dam. For a long second, nothing happens, and in that second you can feel the terrifying possibility that it still won't be enough. And then the dam gives. Not with a neat crack. Not with a cinematic split down the middle. It fails like a living thing finally surrendering. A section of concrete slumps outward, and suddenly there's a dark shape where solid wall used to be. Water pours through at first like smoke, then like a river, then like the ocean deciding it has been imprisoned long enough. A roaring black waterfall. It doesn't just fall. It devours the valley below. And up in the air, in the cockpit of a Lancaster banking away, the men who were told this was a cartoon watched the impossible become real. Because now the bomb has done its job. Now the roar has a new enemy. Not aircraft. Not bombs. Water. And Gibson doesn't circle to admire it. He turns his Lancaster toward the next target in the darkness, toward the Etter, because the night isn't over and the squadron is already bleeding. But behind him the sound grows. A deepening, unstoppable roar rolling downriver like judgment. Gibson points the Lancaster away from the roaring breach and into a darkness that feels suddenly wider. Behind them, the Mohne is no longer a lake. It's a weapon. You can't see the flood once you're clear of the valley, but you can feel it in your bones, like thunder you only half heard. The crew is still staring back, still trying to make their eyes accept what they just witnessed, when the navigator's voice cuts through the adrenaline. Course for the Etter. No cheering. No victory cries. Not yet. This raid was never a single punch. It was a sequence, a chain of miracles that had to happen in the right order, under the right pressure, with the right men still alive to do them. Gibson knows it, and so do the crew still following him. 3 Lancasters, still carrying the last of the mines, form up as best they can in the night. Flight Lieutenant Dave Shannon, already pale under the cockpit's red glow. Squadron Leader Henry Maudsley, steady, quiet. And at the back, the last chance. Pilot Officer Les Knight, his Lancaster AJN carrying the final upkeep in the first wave, the last spinning drum that can still change the map tonight. The engines keep their relentless beat, but the mood inside Gibson's aircraft changes. The Mohne was defended with guns and lights, and you could fight that kind of danger because it was loud and visible. The Etter is different. It's silence and terrain. It's a dam built in a place that looks like nature designed it specifically to kill low-flying aircraft. The first hint is the fog. It starts as a smear on the horizon, then thickens into a pale lid over the valley. The Etter reservoir snakes between steep hills, twisting like a dark ribbon, and the fog sits on it as if the water is breathing. There are no searchlights reaching up here. No flak bursts punching the air. But that doesn't make it safer. It makes it worse. Because now the enemy isn't a gunner. It's the hillside you don't see until it's too late. It's the moment your wings clip a treetop you didn't know existed. It's the instinct to climb when you absolutely must not. Gibson circles wide, keeping his Lancaster in a slow orbit like a lighthouse in the dark. He can't drop here, but he can lead. He can watch the approaches. He can talk men through the only path that might work. Down below, the dam is barely visible, a blunt curve across the valley, appearing and disappearing as fog drifts past like smoke. It's almost peaceful. Almost. Shannon goes first. His Lancaster drops low into the valley, and for a second it looks like he's vanished into cloud. Then the aircraft reappears, sliding along the reservoir's curve, trying to line up. He starts an approach, and aborts at the last moment, climbing hard to clear the far hillside. He tries again. And again. Each run is a knife edge, too high and the mine won't behave, too low and the water or the trees will take him. The valley forces him into a turn that feels physically wrong for a heavy bomber, banking and descending at night, inside fog like threading a needle while wearing gloves. Shannon makes run after run, 6 times fighting for the right angle, 6 times pulling away at the last second because the dam just won't sit in the right place in his windscreen. You can almost feel what that does to a crew. Every approach is a fresh spike of fear, a fresh tightening of the stomach. Every abort is relief that curdles into dread because you know you have to do it again. And the longer it goes on, the more the fog thickens, the more your fuel bleeds away, the more your hands start to shake from the effort of being steady for too long. Maudsley moves up. His Lancaster drops into the valley with the calm inevitability of a man who knows there's no other choice. He lines up, skimming the reservoir, the aircraft spotlights painting faint, quivering pools on the dark surface. The dam grows in the haze, closer, closer. Release. The mine falls away. For an instant you expect the familiar pattern. The bounce, the skip, the clean run into the wall. Instead the bomb strikes too high. It smashes into the top of the dam like a thrown hammer, and the explosion blossoms in a violent flash that turns fog into a white, boiling curtain. The blast slams the Lancaster, a heavy punch that you can almost feel even from Gibson's orbit above. Maudslay's aircraft lurches, badly damaged, staggering away into the night like an animal that's been wounded but refuses to fall. Now it's Shannon again. He comes back down into the valley with the stubbornness of a man who's decided that the valley doesn't get to win. He makes another approach, steadier this time, lower, the dam finally settling into the right geometry in his sighting. Release. The mine hits, skips, reaches the wall, detonates. The valley shudders. But the dam remains. It holds like it's insulted by the attempt. Up there in Gibson's cockpit, the silence is suffocating. He knows what's left. One mine. One aircraft. One crew. And the fog is getting thicker. Night drops in. Gibson watches his Lancaster slide into the valley, disappearing for a moment, then reappearing low over the water, wings level, engines roaring against the close hills. The aircraft looks too big for the space, like a ship sailing through a canyon. There's no flak to distract him, but that almost makes it more intimate, more terrifying, because every danger now is pure flying. Pure judgment. Night lines up for the run with the calm of a man who has no time left for fear. The bomb aimer calls distance. The spotlights under the fuselage search for that perfect height. The dam swells ahead, half ghost, half wall. Release. The final upkeep drops away into the fog. There's a flash on the water. A bounce. Then another. Then the bomb vanishes at the base of the dam, where Wallace said it would go if everything went exactly right. The explosion is not a sharp crack. It's a deep, underwater blow, as if the valley itself has been struck from beneath. The fog ripples. The dam seems to hesitate. And then, it breaks. A section of the wall slumps and opens, and the reservoir behind it surges forward like it's been waiting. The Etter collapses into a dark, roaring spill that pours into the valley below, and Gibson, circling above, watches the second impossible thing happen in the same night. The dam is reported to have finally given way around 1:52 a.m. On the wireless, a short coded message is tapped out, the signal that tells the operations room back in England that the second target is down. But the victory is thin because now the raid has a new phase. Skip. Gibson turns his Lancaster toward home, and the crew finally notices the fuel gauge for what it is. A clock with a needle. Somewhere behind him, other aircraft are scattered across Germany and Holland, some damaged, some missing, some flying on willpower and prayer. And ahead, the Dutch coast is waking up. The horizon has the faintest hint of gray, that first cruel suggestion of dawn, when night flyers become silhouettes and every gunner's job gets easier. Gibson lowers the nose and pushes for the dark line of the sea. Because the dams have fallen. Now the squadron has to survive the trip back through the teeth of Europe. The gray on the horizon is faint at first, like a smudge you could rub away with your thumb. But it spreads. And with every minute the world becomes more visible, which means they become more visible. Gibson keeps the Lancaster down low, the aircraft sliding over fields and hedgerows like a shadow trying to stay attached to the earth. The engines are still loud, but at this height sound feels different, trapped between ground and sky. You can almost imagine farmers waking in their beds, hearing a rumble that doesn't belong to any dream. Inside the cockpit, the crew finally allows themselves to speak again, not about glory, not about history, but about the simplest, ugliest question. Fuel? A glance. A number. A tightening around the eyes. The needle has moved more than it should. It always does on nights like this. The trip in at low level, the weaving, the circling over the valleys, the moments of climbing hard to avoid hills, it all costs more than the plan admits on paper. And now the plan has one final demand. Get out. The wireless crackles with broken voices. Call signs. Fragments. Some calm. Some too calm, like men reading their own obituaries without emotion. Gibson listens, jaw hardening again, trying to build a picture from sound. One aircraft, gone. Another, damaged, limping. A crew calling that they're on one engine. A crew that never answers. You can feel it settle over the Lancaster like cold mist. The knowledge that this victory has already taken lives, and the night is not finished collecting. They skim over a canal, then a road, then a cluster of buildings that flashes past in the dark. The navigator calls headings in a steady voice, but his hands betray him, knuckles pale on the chart board. There is no safe altitude. High means fighters, radar, flak belts. Low means towers, wires, trees, sudden hills that rise out of nowhere like teeth. And still Gibson holds them down in the dirt air because at least down here you can hide. Then the first tracer reaches up again. Not the dense wall they saw over the Mohne, but scattered, opportunistic fire from light positions, men with guns waking up and firing at the sound. Red lines slice upward, lazy but deadly, and the Lancaster shudders as something snaps against the skin of the aircraft. A gunner calls it out, short and sharp, as if naming it makes it less frightening. Tracers. Starboard. Gibson banks slightly, not enough to climb, just enough to alter the angle. The Lancaster feels huge and fragile at the same time, a steel cathedral moving at speed, held together by rivets and luck. Somewhere behind them, another aircraft is not as lucky. You don't see it. You hear it. A voice, suddenly urgent, then clipped, then fading as if the speaker has moved a million miles away in 1 second. A call sign. A location. A final attempt to sound professional. Then static. And the silence that follows is louder than any flak. The coast should be the relief point. The moment where the black line of the sea means you've slipped the noose. But the coast is also a place where defenses concentrate, where radar and guns and fighters expect exactly this kind of low-level intruder trying to escape before daylight makes hiding impossible. The Lancaster presses on, skimming toward that darker horizon. The crew is exhausted now, the kind of exhaustion that makes your thoughts move slowly like boots in mud. Adrenaline doesn't last forever. It burns out and leaves a hollow behind it. And in that hollow, emotion rushes in. You can almost feel the bomb aimer's hands shaking, not from fear anymore but from the delayed impact of what he just did. You can almost see the navigator replaying the valley turns in his mind, the fog, the dam, the moment the bomb dropped away and the aircraft continued forward without it, lighter and suddenly mortal. And you can almost hear the unspoken thought in every man's head. We did it, so why does it still feel like we're not allowed to celebrate? Because celebration is a luxury you can't afford when you're still flying over enemy territory. A thin strip of pale light appears to the east. Dawn is coming. Not the gentle morning of postcards, but a harsh unveiling. The kind that turns forest into outlines and aircraft into targets. Gibson keeps them low, lower still, and the ground begins to blur beneath them. At this speed it's not just flying. It's skating across the map, hoping no hand reaches up to grab you. Then at last the sea. A vast blackness that feels like freedom. The Lancaster crosses the shoreline and the crew exhales in one shared, involuntary release. It's not joy. It's the physical act of realizing you're still alive. Behind them, England is still far. Ahead, the gray light grows stronger. The sea is empty and indifferent. The aircraft's engines keep their steady beat, but now that they are over water, every odd vibration feels more personal. Every cough of the engine feels like a threat. And still the wireless keeps talking. Names. Numbers. Missing crews being noted in real time like accountants recording grief. Somewhere out there, one of their own is flying alone, lost, maybe wounded, maybe trying to ditch in the dark. Somewhere out there, a Lancaster has already hit the ground and burned, and the war has quietly claimed another set of men who won't make the newspapers the way the dams will. You can almost see it, the empty chairs in the mess hall at Scampton, the mugs left half full, the cigarettes never finished. When the English coastline finally appears, it's not dramatic. It's just land. A darker band under a brightening sky. But to men who have spent hours in enemy darkness, it looks like the edge of another world. Gibson's Lancaster crosses in, and the first signs of home come not as cheers, but as routine. Airfields, familiar navigation markers, the sense that the ground below is no longer trying to kill you. And then the base. RAF Scampton lies ahead, runway lights dim in the early light, crews on the ground staring upward, counting shapes, trying to match silhouettes to names. The Lancaster touches down with a jolt that runs through every bone. Tires screech. The aircraft shudders and slows, rolling out into the thin morning. Only when the engines wind down does the reality land fully. They climb out into cold air that smells like grass and fuel and sleeplessness, and the men on the ground don't rush forward screaming. They don't know what to do with this yet. They see the faces, the soot, the 1,000-yard stares, and they start counting. 1, 2. Not enough. And as Gibson walks across the tarmac toward debrief, boots heavy, shoulders tight, he realizes the raid has created two stories at once. One is the story the world will hear. Dams breached, the Ruhr flooded, a bold strike pulled off by a new squadron. The other is the story written in absences. Because before anyone can call it a triumph, someone has to ask the question no one wants to answer. How many didn't come back? The counting starts before the engines stop echoing. At RAF Scampton, men and women stand in little knots along the edge of the field, jackets pulled tight against the early morning chill, eyes fixed on the approach path like that alone can pull aircraft out of the sky. The runway lights glow faint in the growing daylight. Somewhere a motor vehicle idles. Somewhere a kettle is boiling because someone, somewhere, is still clinging to routine like it's a life raft. And above it all, the sound they're waiting for. A distant rumble. Then the black shape appears, low and heavy, sliding toward home. People lean forward without meaning to. You can feel their hope physically, like a hand pushing against your chest. The Lancaster drops its wheels, touches down, rolls, turns off. The propellers blur, then slow. When the hatch opens, the crew climbs out stiffly, blinking like men who have been underwater. Ground crew surge toward them with questions already in their faces, but the answers aren't the kind you can shout across a tarmac. How many? Who's missing? Did it work? Gibson is walking across the field toward debrief, and he can sense the air changing around him. Not awe. Not yet. Not celebration. Something tighter. Something wary. Because everyone can see it now, even without a tally board. There aren't enough aircraft. There aren't enough men. In the operations room, the war is a wall of details. Clocks, maps, plotting tables, pencil marks, voices passing times and headings in the clipped tones of people trained not to panic. A WAF plotter slides a marker across the board. Another writes a note, then writes another, then hesitates with her pencil hovering because the next line might be the one that becomes permanent. Missing. No contact. Overdue. And when someone says overdue, it hangs in the air like smoke. Gibson steps into debrief and the room seems to compress around him. Faces turn. Someone offers him a chair. Someone offers him a cigarette. He doesn't take either at first. His mind is still in the valleys, still hearing flak bursts and the strange underwater thump of upkeep hitting its mark. A senior officer asks the question that matters. Was the Mohne breached? Gibson answers, and you can see the room register it before the words even settle. A brief stillness. A subtle release. The feeling of a door opening into something larger than all of them. Yes. Then, almost immediately, the next question. And the editor? Yes. Two words that should feel like a triumph. But they land with weight because everyone in that room knows what it cost to drag those words back across Europe. Names begin to surface, spoken quietly at first, then written down. Hopgood. Estelle. Barlow. Byers. The ones who went in and didn't come out. The ones who were last heard calm, and then nothing. Men who were laughing in the mess only hours ago, making jokes about this spinning drum, about the ridiculousness of it all, about how strange it felt to be part of something no one else in Bomber Command could even imagine. Now their chairs are empty. Outside, word spreads across the station like a ripple. Some of it is accurate. Some of it is a myth forming in real time. The dams are down. They flooded the Ruhr. It worked. And then, quieter, the part nobody wants to say out loud. We lost a lot. If you walk through the dispersal area you can almost feel the absence. The way ground crew glance automatically toward hard stands where aircraft should be parked. The way someone steps toward a returning Lancaster with a grin and then stops, the grin fading because they were expecting a different code letter on the nose. A different crew. And over in the mess the mugs are still there. The ashtrays. The half-written letters. The little details that make it worse because they prove how normal life was before midnight. Gibson is pulled from room to room, asked for timings, for angles, for heights, for how the defenses behaved and how the mine skipped and whether the wall looked like it was going before it finally did. He answers because that's his job, because there will be more raids and more men and they'll need every scrap of truth they can get. But the moment that stays with him isn't in the debrief. It's later when he finally pauses and hears someone say very softly, almost like they're ashamed of it. 53. Not 53 aircraft. Not 53 bombs. 53 men. And suddenly the whole night rearranges itself in your mind. The bounces across the water. The white flashes. The roar of the breach. They don't vanish. But they're joined now by another soundtrack. The silence from call signs that never answered. Far from Scampton, in a different kind of quiet, Barnes Wallace is waiting. He has been waiting for hours in the way only an inventor can wait when his invention has finally left the safety of drawings and workshops and become something that can kill the people using it. On paper, upkeep is math and spin and timing. In the air, it is men flying low through gunfire because he asked them to. Someone brings him the news in fragments. A message passed along. A voice on a telephone. Words that should be clean and victorious. The Mohne is breached. The editor is breached. For a brief moment, the impossible thing he carried for months, while others called it foolish, is suddenly real. The world has proven his idea was not a cartoon. And then the second part reaches him. The losses. The dead. The missing. It hits harder than any criticism ever did because criticism never had faces attached. Never had families. Never had empty chairs in a mess hall. Wallace doesn't celebrate. He doesn't pump his fist. He just sits with it, the weight of it, and you can almost see the question forming behind his eyes. Was it worth it? And that question doesn't belong to him alone. It belongs to every person in that chain, from the men who designed the mine to the men who loaded it, to the crews who flew it, to the people below the dams who had no idea what was about to happen to their world. Because while Scampton counts its missing, dawn is already spilling into the valleys of Germany. And downriver from the broken concrete, the first villages are about to learn what a roaring black waterfall really means. Down in the Mohn Valley, the first warning is not a siren. It's a sound no one can place. A low, growing thunder that doesn't belong to weather. It doesn't roll across the sky like a storm. It comes from the valley floor, from the river itself, like the earth has cracked open and is breathing out. Most people are asleep. Farmhouses. Worker barracks. Small villages tucked along the water because water is life, until it isn't. Then the night turns into motion. The flood wave hits like a moving wall, black and heavy, carrying trees, fences, wagons, roof beams, anything it can tear loose. You can almost see it in the darkness even if you can't see the water itself. because you can hear what it does. The splintering, the snapping, the crash of wood against stone, the screams that don't last long enough to become a chorus. Some people wake in time to run. Some open their doors and are met by water at chest height. Some never wake at all. And mixed into it are the people history rarely gives a clean name to in the first telling. The foreign laborers, the prisoners, the displaced workers housed in camps near the water because their lives were considered cheap. Barracks built low. Barracks built fast. Barracks built where the flood goes first. The Mohne and the Eder weren't just dams. They were control. Control over power and water supply, over industry, over the rhythm of the Ruhr. The dams fed canals, supported hydroelectric stations, steadied reservoirs that kept factories humming even when rainfall didn't cooperate. That's why they were guarded. That's why Wallace wanted them. But the dam breaking doesn't target industry in the way a staff map suggests. It targets anything that can't outrun water. By morning, the valley is unrecognizable. The river is wider, angrier. Roads are ripped open. Bridges vanish. Railway lines hang like snapped string. Where there were neat fields, there is mud and debris and the strange stillness that follows a disaster so big it feels unreal. And in the Ruhr, further down, the realization spreads in a different language. Numbers, shortages, interruptions, sudden failures that ripple across a system built on constant flow. Power stations go offline. Waterworks are overwhelmed. Factories lose supply, lose pressure, lose the predictable stability they need to keep machines running. You can almost picture a foreman stepping into a plant at dawn, expecting routine and finding gauges dropping, pumps failing, lines slowing, and not understanding why until someone runs in with a breathless explanation that sounds like madness. The dam is gone. Gone? How does a dam just go? At first the German response is disbelief, the human kind. The stubborn refusal to accept something that shouldn't be possible because it violates the sense of safety that big structures create. Then the military response snaps into place. Roadblocks. Dispatch riders. Engineers summoned from beds. Anti-aircraft crews ordered to higher readiness. Telephone lines burning with calls up the chain of command. Somewhere, a staff officer begins drafting the report that will travel to Berlin, choosing words carefully because words can't undo a broken wall. And when the photographs come in, when daylight confirms the gap at the Mohne, when men stand on the damaged crest and stare down at the torn belly of the dam, the disbelief dies. Because you can't argue with a missing piece of concrete the size of a building. Now the response becomes desperate and methodical. Repair. Contain. Restore. The German war economy is built to absorb damage, and it has an entire instinct for it. Organizations that can mobilize labor fast. Engineers who know concrete and steel like surgeons know bone. Crews that can throw temporary bridges across gaps and reroute supply lines around broken arteries. And in the center of it all is the cold logic of necessity. The Ruhr must keep breathing. So they work. They work with floodwater still draining through valleys. They work with mud-swallowing vehicles. They work while bodies are still being found downstream. They work because a war machine doesn't pause for morning. At Scampton, far away, the air still tastes like exhaust and sleeplessness, but the news arriving from reconnaissance is sharper now. Confirmation. Photographs. Aerial images that turn the night's chaos into proof. Gibson sees them later. A jagged bite taken out of the Mohne. Water spilling where water should never spill. The shape of victory made visible. For a moment it is almost satisfying. Then the human mind does what it always does when it's allowed to catch up. It fills the picture with the things the camera can't show. The people below. The darkness. The sound. He doesn't say it out loud, but you can feel the unease under the pride. Because this raid didn't just destroy a target. It unleashed something. Barnes Wallace sees the images too, and they hit him in a way no blueprint ever could. The breach is exactly what he dreamed, exactly what he insisted was possible, and it should be the end of the argument. The answer to every man who smiled politely at the cartoon. But what he's really looking at isn't vindication. It's consequence. And somewhere in Germany, as the damage reports climb toward Berlin, the men who run the war begin asking their own questions. Not about the past hour, but about the next one. If the British can do this, what else can they do? What else is vulnerable? And what will they try next? Because one night in May has just proven that a single idea, carried by a handful of aircraft, can punch a hole in the illusion of safety. And once that illusion is gone, everyone starts building new defenses. New traps. New ways to kill the next crew that comes in low. Back at Scampton, the surviving crews are still stumbling through debrief, still answering questions, still trying to look like professionals while their nerves tremble under the surface. The raid is already becoming a story people will tell, a name people will repeat. But inside Bomber Command, another reality is forming just as quickly. Now that it worked once, someone will want it to work again. And the men who proved it could be done are about to learn what happens when you become the squadron called in for impossible jobs. That was the problem. It worked. And in wartime, the moment something works, it stops being a wild idea and becomes a lever. Something commanders want to pull again, harder, faster, with higher expectations and less patience for the cost. But before it was a lever, before it was a squadron briefing and a midnight roar over German water, it was just a man in an office with paper, numbers, and a stubborn kind of faith. March 1943. Vickers Works, Weybridge. Late night. The building is quiet in the way factories are quiet after hours, as if the machines themselves are sleeping. A single desk lamp burns in a pool of yellow light. In that light sits Barnes Wallace, sleeves rolled, tie loosened, fingers stained with graphite. He isn't building a bomb. He's building an argument. On the desk are sketches of dams like ribs across a valley, diagrams of pressure and shock waves, notes about water behaving like a battering ram when you hit it the right way. His handwriting is small and tight, the kind that suggests a mind moving faster than the hand can keep up. Wallace rubs his eyes and looks again at the numbers that refuse to become polite. He knows what the men upstairs, the men in uniforms and committees, are thinking. Dams are too big, too protected, too far. And even if you could hit them, the bomb would detonate on the surface, waste its force into the air, and the wall would laugh it off. So he keeps returning to the same ugly truth. If you want to crack a dam, you have to explode underwater, pressed against the wall so the pressure has nowhere to go but into concrete. And that's where the cartoon is born. Because how do you put an explosive charge against a dam wall when the dam is guarded, netted, and surrounded by guns? You don't send divers. You don't send a slow torpedo that gets caught in nets. You make the bomb behave like a stone skipped across a lake, jumping the nets, running right up to the wall, and then, instead of bouncing away, you make it cling long enough to sink where it needs to sink. A weapon that uses backspin like a prank. A weapon that sounds ridiculous the first time you describe it out loud. Even now, in his quiet office, Wallace can almost hear the tone people use when they're trying not to insult you. A bouncing bomb. Pause. A polite smile. And then the conversation shifts to something more serious. But Wallace doesn't shift. He doubles down. He writes letters. He pushes meetings. He shows his calculations like evidence in a trial because that's what it feels like. Not invention. Conviction. And eventually the idea squeezes through the cracks of skepticism, not because everyone suddenly believes in it, but because the war is desperate enough to gamble on almost anything that might break the Ruhr's industrial heartbeat. So the Air Ministry approves the next stage, which means the cartoon has to become hardware. And hardware means test drops, spinning mechanisms, aircraft modifications, crews trained to fly like they're inside a nightmare. It also means one other thing. A squadron. Not a regular bomber squadron, not men cycling through standard missions, but a hand-picked unit designed for a single job that requires a kind of flying most bomber crews never practice. Oh, fast, accurate, suicidal if you say it bluntly. The RAF forms a new unit around that requirement, and it gets a number that will soon carry its own weight. 617 Squadron. They need a leader who can do two things at once. Someone who can fly with precision under pressure, and hold other men together when the pressure starts cracking them. They pick Guy Gibson. Young, already decorated, already experienced, already carrying the hard edge of someone who has seen enough burning aircraft to understand what is being asked. When Gibson is told, he doesn't grin. He doesn't ask for glamour. He asks for details. And the details are monstrous. The training begins in daylight because you can't learn death by jumping straight into the dark. Lancasters roar over English countryside at a height that makes farm dogs bark and people look up in alarm. Crews practice holding steady at a height that feels wrong for a heavy bomber. 60 feet is not an altitude, it's a decision. It's choosing to trust your hands and your instruments over the part of your brain that screams, climb. They practice approaches over water because water will be the measuring stick. 2 spotlights under the fuselage are angled so their beams meet at the correct height, a crude trick that becomes sacred. Crews obsess over it. They watch the twin pools of light merge and separate, until it feels like the only truth left in the world. Distance is another problem. At night, with flak and searchlights and fear, how do you know you're at the right range from a dam? The solution looks like something a child would make in a woodshop. A simple triangular sighting device, 2 uprights and a notch. When the towers on the dam line up perfectly in the sight, you're at the release point. It's primitive. It's brilliant. It's also terrifying because it means the entire plan depends on a human eye getting it right at speed. And then there's the weapon itself. Upkeep hangs under the Lancaster like a strange metal drum on a cradle. Bomb bay doors are gone. The aircraft looks unfinished, like it's been cut open and reassembled around one secret. A motor spins the cylinder backward before release, fast enough that the crew can feel it through the airframe, a subtle vibration that whispers, this thing is alive. Some men see it and laugh. Not cruel laughter. Not dramatic explosions, not headline disasters, but the normal violence of low flying, clipped treetops, near misses, hard landings, engines pushed to limits. Training itself becomes a filter. It quietly removes the men who can't keep that kind of precision when their pulse goes too fast. Gibson watches it happen and says less and less. He becomes more focused, more severe because he understands the truth no one wants to say. If they can't fly perfectly in training over England, they will die over Germany. By mid-May, the squadron feels like a coiled spring. The crews are exhausted, keyed up, living in a loop of practice runs and rumors. They know it's coming. They don't know when. That not knowing is its own torture. Then, finally, the order drops. The briefing room fills with cigarette smoke and boot scuffs and the thin jokes men use when they're trying to keep the edge from cutting them. The curtain is pulled back from the map. Targets are revealed. Mohne. Concrete walls that hold back entire lakes. And as the men stare at the map, as the reality of it crystallizes, the laughter dies completely. Because now they understand what the cartoon really means. It means flying a Lancaster at treetop height at night, into the most defended valleys in Germany, and trusting a bouncing bomb to do what no bomb has ever done before. Gibson stands at the front and looks at the faces. He can see it in their eyes. They're not thinking about medals. They're thinking about whether they'll see morning. And in the hangar outside, under harsh electric light, upkeep is already mounted and waiting, spinning drum, steel skin, quiet menace, ready to become history or become a grave marker. The hangar doors are open just enough to let the night air in. It carries the smell of wet grass and aviation fuel, a cold, honest scent that makes everything feel sharper. Mechanics move in tight, practiced patterns under harsh lamps, hands blackened with oil, voices low. The Lancasters sit heavy on their wheels, bomb bay doors removed, their bellies exposed and altered, as if someone carved them open and hid a secret inside. Under each one the spinning drum waits. Upkeep. Not gleaming, not heroic. Just steel. Just wait. Just a device that is either about to make history, or turn into a punchline written in smoke. You can almost feel the mood across the dispersal. It's not fear exactly. It's concentration. Like a room full of men about to walk onto a stage where forgetting one line means you die. Some crews write letters. Quick ones. The kind that try to sound normal. Back soon. Don't worry. You can hear the lies in the handwriting. Others don't write at all. They tighten straps. They check maps one more time. They smoke because it gives their hands something to do. Guy Gibson moves through them like a man who has already stepped into the mission. He stops at aircraft, says a few words, checks on a crewman's face the way you check a gauge. His Lancaster AJG sits ready, its nose art and code letter barely visible under the lamps. The crew is strapped in, oxygen tested, guns checked, radios set. He climbs into the cockpit and the world narrows. The canopy frames the night. The red instrument lights make every face look pale and slightly unreal. The engines start one by one, coughing, then catching, then settling into that deep, steady rumble that vibrates through ribs and teeth. And then the moment comes that every man secretly dreads because it makes the whole thing official. Taxi. The aircraft rolls forward, slow and heavy, tires crunching on the track. Ground crew step back, hands raised in signals. Someone gives a thumbs up that feels too casual for what's about to happen. The runway stretches ahead, black and slick under the night. Gibson lines up. You can almost feel him pause, just long enough to let the weight of it brush past his mind. Not the target. Not the plan. The simple fact that once he advances the throttles, there is no clean way to stop being part of this. He pushes them forward. The Lancaster surges. The engines roar into full voice, a sound that fills the airfield and the men standing along the perimeter. The aircraft shakes, then steadies as speed builds. The runway lights streak past. The tail lifts. For a second the Lancaster feels like it might not leave the ground at all, like the weight of the drum beneath it is too much, like gravity has decided this is where the story ends. Then the wheels lift free. And the cartoon flies. One by one the Lancasters follow, each take off a brief moment of suspended belief. Aircraft rising into the night, turning toward the east, toward water, toward occupied Europe. Down below, Scampton gets smaller and quieter until it's just another patch of darkness. Above, the sky is wide and indifferent. The formation doesn't stay tight. It can't. Not for what comes next. This is not a high-altitude bomber stream. This is low-level flying through hostile territory, and low-level flying is personal. Each crew will feel every hill, every wire, every church spire. Each pilot will make choices that are his alone. Soon the English coast slides beneath them, a dark line that means home is behind and everything ahead is enemy. Then the North Sea. Cold, empty, black as ink. You can almost feel the temperature drop in the cockpit, the way it creeps through seams and gloves. The navigator calls headings. The wireless operator listens to the quiet chatter of call signs, men trying to sound casual while their hearts hammer. Gibson keeps them low. So low the sea feels close enough to swallow them without effort. Ahead, the first faint smudge of land appears. The Dutch coast. Occupied. Waiting. They come in over it like ghosts, engines throttled just enough to keep speed without climbing, skimming above dunes and fields and roads that look peaceful from the air because darkness hides the details. Somewhere below, a man might be looking up, hearing something that doesn't belong, trying to decide whether it's thunder or aircraft. The decision gets made for him when the first gun opens up. Tracer arcs upward in a thin red line, lazy at first, then more confident as other positions wake and join in. It's not the dense, coordinated flak of a major target yet. It's scattered fire, but at this height scattered is enough. A single round in the wrong place can end a mission before it begins. Gibson's crew feels it before they see it, that instinctive tightening. A gunner calls out, "Clipped." Light flak. Gibson doesn't answer. He just nudges the Lancaster lower, and you can almost feel the aircraft crouch trying to become part of the terrain. Behind him, somewhere in the dark, another Lancaster hits trouble. It's the kind of trouble you don't hear in detail. Just a sudden edge in someone's voice. A burst of transmission that cuts off too quickly. A call sign repeated once, twice, then nothing. In the cockpit, Gibson's crew listens, waiting for the voice to come back with a calm correction. It doesn't. And now the raid has its first shadow. They press on. Across Dutch fields. Over a canal that glints faintly. Past clusters of buildings that are just shapes in the night. Every few minutes, more tracer. More little bites of fire rising up. The Lancasters weave not wildly but enough to spoil aim. You can almost feel the strain of holding that balance. Steady enough for navigation, unpredictable enough to survive. And then the worst kind of enemy appears. Not a gun. A wire. Somewhere ahead, a line of power cables stretches across the darkness, invisible until it's too late. At this altitude there is no room for surprises like that. One mistake and a Lancaster doesn't crash like a small aircraft. It disintegrates. It becomes pieces and flame. Gibson's eyes keep scanning, always scanning, because at 60 feet you don't fly over you knife through it. The German border is just an idea on a map, but you feel it anyway when the ground defenses sharpen, when the tracer grows thicker, when the night seems to lean toward you with more intent. And as the horizon ahead darkens into the shape of Germany, Gibson's crew realizes something with a chill that has nothing to do with altitude. The dams are still far away. They haven't even reached the main target. And already the night is taking aircraft. The night keeps thinning as they go. Not into daylight yet, not even close, but into that strange in-between where your eyes start catching detail you didn't want. A church tower. A line of trees. The faint shine of a canal. At 60 feet, those details aren't scenery. They're hazards. Gibson holds the Lancaster down in the dark air, watching the ground like it might suddenly rise up and bite. The navigator feeds him headings in a steady voice, but the route is more than a line on a chart now. It's a corridor of decisions, and every decision has consequences measured in seconds. A farmhouse flashes beneath them. Then a road. Then a thin ribbon of railway that glints like a blade. Somewhere off to the left, tracer climbs again, bright red beads arcing up in lazy confidence. It's not aimed fire, not yet. More like the reflex of men waking up and shooting at the sound, hoping luck will do the aiming for them. The rear gunner tracks it, finger tense on the trigger, but there's nothing to shoot. At this altitude, at this speed, the enemy isn't a fighter you can see. It's a silhouette you never get a clean look at. It's the flash of a muzzle, the sudden pop of a gun position hidden behind a hedgerow. Then ahead, a dull orange bloom appears low on the horizon. Not sunrise. Not a city. A fire. A Lancaster going down somewhere in the dark. The sight hits the crew like a punch because it confirms what the radio only suggested. The night is not just dangerous. It is actively collecting them. One by one. The wireless operator listens hard, knuckles white around his pencil. He hears voices trying to keep it together. Any stations, this is static. A clipped reply from someone else, then nothing. And the silence after feels deliberate, like the ether itself is closing its mouth. Gibson doesn't speak much. He doesn't have spare words. He keeps the aircraft steady, and when flak snaps up near them, he shifts course just a few degrees, enough to spoil the aim without climbing into the sky where radar can see him clean. Because that's the trade tonight. Low means wires and trees and sudden hills. High means you become a target with a neat, predictable arc. So low it stays. Across the Netherlands, the landscape changes as the ground rises and falls in subtle waves. You can almost feel the Lancaster responding to it, the pilot nudging it up and down, always skimming, always just above the world. The engines keep their deep rhythm, but now and then there's a tiny hiccup in the sound, a brief unevenness that makes every man in the aircraft go still. Is it nothing? Or is it the beginning of something you can't fix at 60 feet? Gibson watches his gauges. Oil pressure. Temperature. Fuel. Each needle becomes a promise you need to keep. Behind him, the crew settles into a tense quiet, the kind that forms when men realize conversation won't change anything. Then the border. There's no sign that says Germany begins here. No gate. No dramatic shift in color. But the ground fire changes almost immediately, as if the land itself is wired to react. Tracer thickens. Bursts of flak appear higher up in the distance. Searchlights sweep lazily at first, then sharper, like predators waking. Gibson's Lancaster slips through the first belt of it, staying low, using the darkness and the terrain. But the farther they go, the more the sky ahead looks busy. Not with aircraft. With defenses. Somewhere, a crew ahead has been spotted. A thin white beam snaps onto the night, then another. They stab upward, searching, crossing, widening, tightening. Even from a distance you can tell what it feels like to be caught in them. Like someone reaching for you with hands made of light. Gibson keeps his eyes forward. He knows what matters. The dams are still ahead, and every gunner, every searchlight crew, every flak battery around those valleys will be more awake than anything they've met so far. Because the dams are protected the way a nation protects its lifeblood. And yet, the closer they get, the more the mission begins to feel strangely simple. Not easy. Never easy. Simple. Fly the route. Hit the height. Hit the speed. Release at the right distance. Trust the spin. That's it. That's the whole gamble. The navigator calls a correction and Gibson banks slightly, the Lancaster's wingtips seeming to almost brush darkness itself. Somewhere below, a village sleeps, unaware that history is sliding over its rooftops. Somewhere ahead, water lies in a valley like black glass, waiting. And then the night changes again. The air becomes colder, heavier, as if they've entered a basin. The ground rises into gentle hills and then drops away, and in the distance, a large dark shape starts to take form. Not land. Water. The Mohne Reservoir. From the cockpit, it looks unreal, a wide black surface that reflects almost nothing. It's too smooth, too calm, too innocent for what it's about to become. The dam itself is not visible yet, but you can sense it. A presence at the far end of the valley. A concrete spine waiting in the dark. Gibson begins the descent without drama. He brings the Lancaster lower, down until the altimeter numbers look wrong, down until you can feel the aircraft's relationship with gravity change. The crew shifts with it, harness straps tightening, bodies bracing without thinking. Then the spotlights under the fuselage flick on. Two pale cones reach down and touch the reservoir, trembling slightly as the aircraft rides the air. The beams slide across the water, hunting for that one correct overlap. That one bright oval that means the Lancaster is exactly where it needs to be. The bomb aimer is already down on his belly, face to the sighting window, breathing shallow, eyes scanning forward. He whispers distance under his breath as if speaking too loudly might jinx it. Gibson levels out. Ahead, the far end of the reservoir begins to sharpen into shape. A line. A curve. Concrete. And just as the dam emerges from the darkness like a wall rising out of the earth, the first searchlight snaps on in the valley. A white blade of light swings, finds the water, and starts climbing toward the Lancaster. The searchlight climbs the valley wall like it's sniffing for blood. It sweeps across the reservoir, hesitates, then snaps upward in a fast, confident arc. For a second it misses the Lancaster, slicing past the wingtip and into empty sky. Then it swings back, and catches them. The cockpit floods with white glare so intense it feels physical. Every rivet, every seam, every curve of the fuselage is suddenly exposed. The Lancaster isn't a shadow anymore. It's a target pinned in midair. Searchlight, the rear gunner barks. Gibson doesn't flinch. He can't afford to. He keeps the aircraft dead level, holding the line over the black water. You can almost feel how unnatural it is, flying straight while being lit up like a performer on stage. A second light joins the first. Then a third. The valley becomes a cage of brightness, and the dam at the far end is now clearly visible, a massive curved wall with towers like teeth. There's no time to admire it. No time to think about what it represents. Because now the guns begin. The first flak bursts appear as black, blooming puffs, so close you can see their edges lit by the searchlights. The Lancaster shudders as shock waves slap it like a rough hand. Then the tracer starts. Thin red lines reach up, not scattered now but organized, coordinated, a net being thrown exactly where they have to fly. You can almost imagine the German gunners down there, eyes up, tracking the steady, predictable approach, adjusting the timing. The bomb aimer is already whispering. Not prayers. Distances. Steady, steady. Beneath the Lancaster, the two spotlights paint their trembling circles on the water. The crew watches those circles with the intensity of men reading a heartbeat. Too high and the circles split. Too low and they overlap too much. The correct height is a single bright oval, a moment of visual truth in the chaos. Gibson holds it. 60 feet. 200 plus miles an hour. A heavy bomber flying like a knife. The dam grows larger. The towers begin to separate in the bomb aimer's sight. The distance is tightening to the one moment that matters. The flak gets louder. A sharp, metallic crack hits somewhere in the aircraft and the Lancaster twitches. Another strike. Then another. The sound is wrong, too close, like someone hammering the airframe with a sledge. The flight engineer glances at gauges, eyes flicking fast, looking for the needle that will betray them. Nothing yet. Still, the aircraft feels like it's being pelted by invisible fists. Gibson doesn't move the stick much. Micro corrections only. A tiny nudge left, a tiny nudge right, the way you steer a car on ice without admitting to yourself you're sliding. Range? The bomb aimer says, voice thinning. The dam fills the windscreen now, huge and indifferent. Hold it. The searchlights stay glued to them. The valley is a bowl of brightness and explosions, and the Lancaster is the only thing that matters to every gun in the area. Now. Gibson feels the subtle lurch as upkeep leaves the cradle. Not a dramatic drop. Just a shift in the aircraft's weight, like the Lancaster exhaled. They roar past the dam line and into darkness beyond, and for a second it feels like the worst part should be over. But the men in the cockpit twist in their harnesses to look back. Because the weapon is down there now, bouncing across the reservoir, and the entire raid hangs on whether the cartoon behaves like a miracle. A flash. A bounce. Another flash. It's hard to see through the glare and smoke, but you can sense it moving forward. Running. Skipping toward the wall like something alive. Then the underwater detonation. A heavy thump that you feel more than hear, as if the reservoir itself has been struck from beneath. The dam holds. For a second you can't tell. Everyone stares, eyes hungry for the sight of collapse. But the curve of concrete remains intact. No gap. No roar of water. No sudden black waterfall. Just the dam still standing, still daring them. The disappointment isn't spoken. It doesn't need to be. It sits in the cockpit like a new weight. Gibson banks away hard, dragging the Lancaster out of the searchlight beams. The flak follows anyway, snapping around them like angry jaws. He keeps low, skimming over the reservoir's far end, then climbs slightly just long enough to clear rising ground. And then, instead of heading for home, he turns back into the valley. Back into the teeth. Because that was always the plan. If the first mine didn't break it, they'd go again. One aircraft after another, each one taking the same deadly path, each one betting that its release will be the one that finally cracks the wall. Gibson's job now is not to drop bombs. It's to lead men into the fire and bring as many out as he can. He calls the next aircraft forward on the radio, his voice steady, almost casual, like he's ordering a cup of tea instead of ordering someone into a searchlight corridor. Second aircraft, begin your run. A reply comes back, clipped, professional. It's John Hopgood. Hopgood's Lancaster drops into the valley, and from Gibson's position you can see what he's walking into. The same searchlights, now warmed up, now hungry, now expecting the next target to arrive on schedule. The lights snap toward him almost instantly. The flak begins earlier, thicker, like the gunners have already corrected their aim based on Gibson's approach. Tracer climbs in long red arcs, intersecting where Hopgood must fly. For a moment, his Lancaster looks like it's flying into a storm made of bullets. Hopgood keeps going. You can almost feel the effort it takes, the way every instinct must be screaming at him to climb, to jink, to break away. But if he breaks away, the mine won't work. If he climbs, he dies. So he holds steady. Then a burst of flak detonates so close it seems to swallow his aircraft in black smoke. When he emerges, the Lancaster is visibly hurt. A flame flickers. Just a small tongue at first, like a match in the dark. Then it grows. Gibson watches, helpless, as Hopgood's aircraft continues its run trailing fire, still holding the line toward the dam because Hopgood understands something terrible and simple. If he is going to burn, he might as well burn on target. The bomb aimer's voice from Hopgood's aircraft cuts through the radio for an instant, strained and urgent. And Hopgood's Lancaster, on fire and shaking, closes on the release point. Hopgood's Lancaster is coming in lit from the inside. The flame is small at first, licking along the wing root like it's testing the air, deciding how fast it can eat. Then it finds something it likes. Fuel vapors. Oil mist. A seam of heat. The fire brightens and the aircraft becomes a moving lantern in the searchlights. Every gun in the valley sees it. You can almost feel the German gunners adjust, not with panic but with satisfaction. A burning bomber is easier to track. Easier to lead. Easier to kill. Gibson is watching from his orbit above and behind, and there is nothing he can do except keep the radio calm and keep the lights off himself. He flies the same circle again, pulling searchlights where he can, dragging attention away in brief, precious seconds. But the valley is awake now. It has learned the pattern. Hopgood's voice comes through, clipped, controlled. Continuing run. Two words that should not exist in the same sentence as on fire. But there they are. Inside Hopgood's cockpit, you can picture it. Smoke curling along the canopy edges, the smell of burning insulation, the heat starting to press in. The flight engineer calling out temperatures that are creeping into the red. The navigator gripping his board like it might keep the aircraft together. The gunners hearing the crack of rounds punching holes in their world and still staying on their sights. And the pilot, holding it dead level over black water. Because if he moves too much, the mine won't behave. The bomb aimer is down on the belly window, and you can almost hear the strain in his breathing as he tries to ignore the way the aircraft shudders, the way the flames flicker in the corner of his view, the way the dam towers loom like a gate to a world that does not want them. Distance, distance. The searchlights lock onto Hopgood and squeeze him in white. Tracer rises in fat red strings, intersecting exactly where his nose is pointed. Flak bursts so close they seem to touch the wings. Then a hit lands hard enough that even Gibson's crew feels it through the air. Hopgood's Lancaster lurches, dips, recovers. Still it keeps coming. This is the moment where a man finds out what he really is. Not in speeches. Not in training. Not in the mess with laughter and cigarettes. Here. In a bright cage of searchlights. With fire crawling behind him. With his crew depending on his hands. Hopgood pushes on. Steady. The dam fills his windscreen. Hold it. And then, release. Upkeep drops away into the glare. For a second, hope flares like the fire on his wing. The bomb hits the water. It skips. It runs forward, fast, clean, and then it does something cruel. It goes too far. It clears the dam. It detonates beyond the wall in a brilliant flash that lights the valley like noon for a heartbeat, and you can almost feel every man in every cockpit register the same sick realization at the same time. Wrong side. Wrong place. Wrong miracle. Hopgood's aircraft is already dying. The fire is bigger now, a hungry orange that clings to the wing and trails smoke behind like a flag. He turns away from the dam, trying to get out of the valley, trying to put distance between his crew and the guns. But the valley doesn't let go easily. A final burst of flak finds him. The Lancaster jerks and starts losing altitude. It looks for a moment like it might climb out anyway, wounded but stubborn. Then the nose dips. The burning bomber slides down into the darkness beyond the reservoir, and the fireball that follows is brief and absolute, a violent punctuation at the end of a sentence nobody wanted to write. On the radio, Hopgood's call sign never speaks again. And Gibson, still circling, forces his voice to stay level because if it cracks now, if it sounds like grief, the next crew will hear it and their hands will tighten and their altitude will wobble and someone else will die. So he does what a commander does when the world is falling apart around him. He keeps the machine moving. Next aircraft, begin your run. The reply comes back from Flight Lieutenant Mickey Martin, and there's something in his tone that is not bravado. It's acceptance. A cold understanding that Hopgood's death has not changed the job. It has only made it harder. Martin drops in low. The searchlights swing. The flak resumes. It feels endless now, like the valley has a heartbeat made of explosions. Gibson flies his diversion again, crossing the dam line, drawing a few beams, taking a few bursts, buying Martin seconds the way you buy time with blood. Martin holds the Lancaster steady at 60 feet. The spotlights under his fuselage meet on the water in a bright oval that trembles but stays true. The dam towers a line in his simple wooden sight like fate snapping into place. Release. Upkeep hits the reservoir and begins to skip. What? Twice. Each bounce is a flash, a slap of spray, a step closer to the wall. Then it vanishes at the base of the dam and the underwater detonation hits with that heavy, wrong-sounding thump that makes your stomach drop. For a second, the dam looks unchanged. Then, a subtle shift. A bruise in the concrete. A change in the texture as if the wall has flinched. Not broken, but hurt. And that hurts the wall in a way Hopgood's failed drop could not. It proves the concept is working, slowly, brutally, one impact at a time. Gibson's eyes lock onto the dam. He can feel the moment turning, like a door starting to give under repeated blows. He calls the next crew in and the next. Ding! Young drops his mine with the calm of a man who understands he is no longer trying to be the first to do something. He is trying to be the one who finishes it. His upkeep runs true. The detonation shudders through the valley and the dam now looks wounded in a way nobody can deny. The concrete face is no longer perfect. It has a rawness to it, a sense that the wall is holding itself together out of stubborn pride. And now the last man comes in. Flight Lieutenant David Maltby. His Lancaster slides into the approach as if it's been summoned by gravity itself. The searchlights find him. The flak reaches up. Tracer crawls around his nose like red insects. And still he holds the line. You can almost feel the entire squadron leaning into his run, willing him lower, steadier, straighter. Because everyone understands what's left. This is no longer, can it work? It's, will it work before the next crew dies? Maltby reaches the release point. He drops upkeep. The bomb skips. It runs. It presses into the dam wall where it needs to be. Then the reservoir seems to pause, like the water is holding its breath. And Gibson, circling above, watches the dam and the searchlights, waiting for the moment the wall finally admits it's mortal. For one long second, nothing happens. The searchlights hold steady on the dam face, bleaching it bone white. The flak keeps sparking, almost out of habit now, as if the gunners can't accept the idea that the wall they're defending might already be dying beneath their feet. Gibson's Lancaster banks in its orbit and the crew stares down through glass, eyes wide, mouths slightly open. You can almost feel the entire valley waiting. Then the dam moves. Not with a dramatic split. Not with a neat crack you can point at and say, there, that's the moment history changed. It sags. A section near the center looks as if it has suddenly grown tired. The concrete bulges outward, almost imperceptibly at first, like a chest drawing in a final breath. And then the surface fractures in a jagged, ugly line that runs faster than the human eye wants to follow. The chunk drops away. And behind it, darkness. Water doesn't pour through like a river. It lunges. It punches out of the gap in a thick black surge, as if the entire reservoir has been pressing forward for years and the dam was the last man holding the door shut. The flow explodes into foam and spray, a roaring white throat that turns instantly into a roaring black waterfall. You can hear it even over the engines. Not clearly, not as a crisp sound, but as a deep, rising vibration that you feel in your gut. The valley's shape amplifies it. The noise becomes something ancient, like a glacier cracking or a cliff face giving way. And then the flood gathers itself. It surges down the valley, dragging trees and debris into its mouth, swallowing the river's course and replacing it with a moving wall of force. It's not water anymore. It's momentum. For a moment, even the German gunner seems stunned. The searchlights waver. One beam slides off the breach and drifts across the reservoir like a hand losing its grip. The flak falters, not because they've become merciful but because the world they were defending has just stopped being the world they knew. Up in the air in Gibson's cockpit, the crew is silent in the purest way. No cheers. No laughter. Just the shock of seeing an impossible plan become a physical, unstoppable thing. The bomb aimer finally exhales as if he's been holding his breath for an hour. The navigator stares down as if trying to memorize the shape of the gap. And Gibson, eyes hard, doesn't allow himself the luxury of relief. Because this isn't the end. This is a signal. The dam is breached. The mission has proved itself. Now the question is how many men are still alive to carry the proof home. He keys the radio, voice steady enough to be cruel. Dam breached. Short. Controlled. The kind of words you say when you're trying not to let emotion deform the sentence. Somewhere out in the dark, crews who are still inbound hear it. Somewhere, men who have been flying toward the same wall of light and flak feel their stomachs twist. For those who haven't made their run yet, it's a strange kind of comfort. And a strange kind of horror. Comfort because it means the madness worked. Horror because it means the valley can be beaten so someone will expect you to beat it again in another valley, another night. Gibson turns his Lancaster away from the breach. The searchlights try to follow but he dives into darker air, hugging the reservoir's edge, skimming low enough that the world becomes a blur again. Behind him, the waterfall grows into a roar that seems to chase them. And down below, the first structures in the valley are about to meet it. A small bridge. A cluster of buildings. A road that runs too close to the river because rivers are supposed to be predictable. They aren't tonight. Gibson doesn't watch long. A commander can't afford to stare at the consequences while the operation is still alive around him. He checks his instruments. Fuel is bleeding away. Engine temps are high. The aircraft has taken hits. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to make the Lancaster feel less like a fortress and more like a stitched-together animal. He calls again, listening for replies that might not come. Call signs answer, some steady, some strained. A few don't answer at all. And every time there's no answer, the silence feels like a body falling through dark water. He knows what happened to Hopgood. He saw it. He doesn't yet know where the others went. Whether they crashed, whether they ditched, whether they're limping home low and alone, or whether they've been swallowed by the night without anyone even seeing the final flash. All he knows is that the squadron he brought into Germany is already smaller than the one that left Scampton. And the raid isn't finished. Because beyond the Mohne lies another dam. Another valley. Another wall. He swings the Lancaster into a wide turn and climbs slightly to clear rising ground. The air grows colder as the aircraft leaves the reservoir basin. The searchlights fade behind them and for the first time in what feels like a lifetime, there is a patch of darkness where no one is firing at them. It should feel like a reprieve. Instead it feels like the calm between punches. Inside the cockpit, the crew's bodies start to register what their minds have been refusing to feel. Hands shake slightly on controls. Muscles ache from holding tension too long. Someone swallows hard and doesn't speak. And somewhere in the belly of the aircraft, the empty cradle where upkeep sat is now just an absence. Proof that they released the weapon, proof that they committed, proof that there's no taking it back. Gibson's voice comes again over the intercom. Course for the next target. Not Eder. Not a name that would make it personal. Just the next target, because names carry weight and weight is dangerous when men are already near their limits. The Lancaster noses into the night, away from the flood they unleashed, toward another valley that is still silent and sleeping, unaware that it's about to become the second act of the same nightmare. And as the engines settle into their rhythm again, you can almost feel the grim truth tightening around the squadron. They have proven the cartoon can break a dam. Now they have to prove they can survive what comes after. The darkness between targets feels almost merciful. No searchlights. No flak bursting close enough to punch the cockpit glass. Just the steady thunder of 4 Merlin engines and the cold black countryside sliding beneath the Lancaster like a moving map. But mercy doesn't last. The navigator's pencil scratches across the chart, then stops. His voice comes quiet, controlled. Approaching the Eder. Gibson lowers the Lancaster again not because he wants to, but because this raid only lives at the edge of the ground. At altitude you can be tracked. Down here you can be lost. Lost to radar, lost to guns, lost to the landscape if you make one bad judgment. Ahead, the Eder Reservoir is not a broad stage like the Mohne. It's a snake. A twisting, narrow ribbon of water tucked between steep hills. And over it sits a layer of fog so smooth it looks poured. It doesn't drift like normal mist. It clings, stubborn, as if the valley itself is exhaling and refusing to stop. You can almost feel Gibson's attention sharpen. This is a different kind of danger. At the Mohne, the enemy was awake and furious, trying to tear them out of the sky. Here the enemy is geometry. A dam that doesn't present itself straight on. A valley that forces a heavy bomber to turn like a fighter. A fog bank that hides the horizon and plays tricks with height until your eyes can't be trusted. Gibson swings into a wide orbit above the reservoir, keeping just enough altitude to see the shape of the valley. Below him, the water disappears and reappears under fog, a black surface intermittently revealed like a secret. He keys the radio. "Shannon, you're first." Flight Lieutenant Dave Shannon brings his Lancaster down into the valley, and for a moment the aircraft is swallowed by whiteness. Then it punches through, low over the water, and you can almost feel the tension inside that cockpit. Every man listening to engine note, watching spotlights, watching the dam that refuses to sit still. Because the dam isn't where it should be. The Eder Dam is tucked around a bend, and the approach is not a clean straight run. Shannon lines up, and the angle is wrong. The hills rise too fast. The dam is drifting out of the sighting line. His bomb aimer can't get the towers to align. Shannon aborts. He hauls the Lancaster up hard, engines roaring, the aircraft climbing toward the dark slope ahead. For a second it looks like he might not clear it. You can almost feel the air thin under his wings. He clears by feet. Then he circles back and tries again. And again. Each attempt is worse, not because Shannon is losing skill, but because the fog is thickening, the valley tightening, the margin shrinking. Every run forces the bomber into a banking turn at low altitude, and you can feel how wrong it is for a Lancaster, how much inertia it carries, how slowly it answers compared to what the valley demands. Above, Gibson watches the runs like a man watching someone defuse a bomb with shaking hands. He can't fly it for Shannon. He can only keep talking, keep the voice steady, keep the instructions simple. Take your time, line up, don't force it. But time is the one thing they don't have. Fuel is draining. Dawn is coming. Shannon pulls out again. His Lancaster climbs through fog, then drops back toward the water, trying to catch the dam at the right moment, like trying to step onto a moving train. Still no clean line. Finally Gibson calls the next aircraft. "Maudsley, your run." Squadron leader Henry Maudsley drops into the valley with a kind of grim patience. His Lancaster looks heavy in the fog, a blunt shape threading between hills. He comes around the bend, spotlights trembling on the water, trying to hold the magic height while the world twists sideways around him. He gets a line. Not perfect but close enough. The dam looms out of the haze like a pale curve, suddenly massive, suddenly unavoidable. Release. Upkeep drops away. For a fraction of a second it looks right, hits the water, starts to skip, but then the approach reveals its cruelty. The angle is just off. The mine doesn't run into the base of the wall the way it did at the Mohne. It strikes high. It slams into the top of the dam and detonates in a violent, blinding flash that turns fog into a white sheet and sends a shockwave rolling through the valley like a slap. Even from Gibson's orbit you can feel the force in your stomach. Maudsley's Lancaster bucks as if hit by a fist. The aircraft staggers away, wounded, dragging itself up and out of the valley with the kind of effort that makes your throat tighten. Now there's one mine left. Shannon is called back down, and this time, whether from stubbornness or instinct or sheer refusal to waste the last chance, he commits. Not even a visible wound. Just that same stubborn curve of concrete, still containing the entire lake like it's insulted by the attempt. Gibson feels the cold settle in. One mine. One crew. One shot left to turn this valley into another black waterfall. He calls the last aircraft. "Knight, you're up." Pilot Officer Les Knight drops into the valley as if he's been waiting his whole life for a single moment. His Lancaster slides low over the fogged water, and the hills on either side look too close, like fists closing in. There are no searchlights here, no flak bursts stitching the sky, only terrain and the pressure of knowing there is no second try. Knight brings the bomber around the bend, aligning with the dam the way you align a knife with a seam. You can almost feel the cockpit silence, that intense, sacred quiet where every man is doing his job and nobody dares to speak above a whisper. Release. The final upkeep drops away into fog. A flash on the water. A bounce. Another. Then the mine disappears at the base of the dam, exactly where it needs to be. The valley hesitates. The fog seems to hold still. And then the Eder Dam gives in a sudden horrifying slump, concrete sagging, cracking, opening, followed instantly by water surging through the gap like something that has been trapped and enraged. A second roaring black waterfall. Gibson watches from above and feels something like disbelief cut through exhaustion. Twice in one night. 2 walls broken open. 2 valleys about to be rewritten by water. He keys the radio voice steady because it has to be. Target breached. Then he turns his Lancaster toward the west. Toward home. Toward the thin gray edge of dawn that is starting to creep up behind them like an enemy with patience. Because the dams are down. And now they have to cross Europe again, in daylight's first breath, with damaged aircraft, missing crews and fuel needles dropping toward zero. Gibson turns west and the Eder Valley falls behind them, still roaring, still pouring itself into the dark like it's trying to erase what happened. For a few minutes there's only the engine note and the tremor of the airframe. Then the sky starts to change. Not sunrise yet. Just that thin, ugly pale band creeping up from the east, the first hint that night is ending whether you're ready or not. And for a low-level raider, dawn isn't beautiful. Dawn is exposure. Gibson drops the Lancaster lower, almost instinctively, as if he can press it into the ground and make it disappear. The altimeter numbers look obscene. The world below is no longer an abstract map. It's detail, trees, hedges, rooftops, power lines that don't care about metals. In the cockpit, the navigator's finger traces the route like it's a lifeline. He calls a heading and Gibson answers with a slight bank, keeping the horizon tilted just enough to feel uncomfortable. The crew is quiet now in a different way than before. Not the tense silence of an attack run. This is the silence of men who have survived something massive and are now too tired to pretend they aren't fragile. The wireless operator breaks it. A call sign. Someone checking in. A voice answers, strained but there. Then another call. No answer. Static. The wireless operator tries again as if the first time was just bad timing. The crew waits, listening to the empty space where a human voice should be. Nothing. Gibson doesn't say the word lost. He doesn't have to. The word exists anyway, hanging between them like breath and cold air. They press on. Low-level flight at night is a series of tiny negotiations with death. Low-level flight at dawn is worse because you can see the bargains you're making. A line of trees comes up fast and Gibson lifts the Lancaster just enough to clear the tops, then sinks it back down immediately because every extra foot makes them easier to spot. Below, a river glints faintly. A road curves away. A small town begins to wake, lights here and there, and you can almost imagine faces turning toward the sound, people trying to understand why a bomber is tearing past their chimney pots like a train that has left the tracks. Then ground fire snaps up again. Not heavy flak. Not the organized thunder of a defended target. Light weapons. Rifles. Machine guns. The desperation fire of men who have seconds to react. Tracer streaks past the cockpit in thin red threads. One line is too close, close enough that the flight engineer flinches. The Lancaster shudders as something hits the skin, a metallic slap, and for a moment everyone waits for the follow-up sound that would mean something important is failing. But the engines keep singing. Gibson nudges the aircraft left, then right, never climbing, always skimming. Because Germany is behind them now in a technical sense, but the defenses do not obey borders. The occupied Netherlands is still awake, still angry, still filled with guns that didn't get the message that the raid is over. Somewhere ahead, a returning Lancaster is flying its own private nightmare. It's the kind of thing you might never see from Gibson's aircraft. You only hear fragments on the radio, someone's breath too loud, a clipped report that they're damaged, that they're losing fuel, that they can't hold height the way they need to. And then the single sickening sentence every airman dreads. Cables, cables. Because cables are silent assassins at 60 feet. Power lines don't glow. They don't announce themselves. They appear as a faint, impossible line across your path, and at 200 miles an hour by the time your eyes register them, your body is already too late. A Lancaster dips trying to go under. Or climbs trying to go over. A wing catches something thin and strong, and suddenly the heavy bomber isn't flying anymore. It's being torn. The nose drops, the tail lifts, and the aircraft becomes a shape falling out of the sky into a field or a canal or a village edge that never asked to be part of this. On the radio, a scream of static. A cut-off transmission. Then nothing. Gibson's crew hears it and nobody speaks. Because what can you say? Unlucky? Sorry? Those words don't reach a burning aircraft. They keep going because the only mercy they can offer the dead is to not join them. The coast comes up slow. The darker line where land ends and sea begins. It should feel like release. It doesn't. Coastal defenses are awake. They know what low-level raiders look like now. They know where the aircraft will try to slip out, skimming over the waves like thieves escaping with loot. Searchlights probe faintly in the distance, not locking on, just tasting the air. More tracer rises from somewhere near a harbor. Gibson keeps the Lancaster low and fast, and then the black expanse of the North Sea opens beneath them like a trapdoor. Over water you can't hide behind trees or hills. There's no terrain to hug. It's just altitude and speed and the hope that the enemy has already stopped looking. In the cockpit, the fuel needle becomes a moral question. How much did the diversions cost? How much did the circling over the dams cost? How much does impossible consume? The flight engineer calls out numbers, and you can hear the effort it takes to keep his voice neutral. The crew begins doing quiet math in their heads. Distance left, headwind, consumption rate, trying to turn fear into arithmetic. Then, faintly at first, the sound of other engines. Another Lancaster appears off the wing, low over the sea, its silhouette darker than the horizon. For a moment there's comfort in it, proof that not everyone was swallowed. The two aircraft fly parallel like exhausted animals stumbling toward shelter. A hand lifts in the cockpit. A small wave. No one smiles. Not really. They just keep flying. At last, the English coastline rises out of the haze. A darker band under a brightening sky. It doesn't look like home the way paintings make it look. It looks like land, solid, indifferent, safe only by comparison. Gibson crosses the coast and the crew exhales as if they've been holding their breath since midnight. But even now the war doesn't let them relax. Because now they have to land. And landing after a night like this is its own kind of danger. Hands are stiff. Eyes are gritty. Minds are still half in the valleys. One mistake on approach, one misjudged flare, and the aircraft can kill you within sight of safety. RAF Scampton appears ahead, runway lights muted in the growing morning. On the ground, people are already gathered, staring up, counting shapes, trying to match silhouettes to names. The Lancaster lines up, descends, wheels down, the runway rushing toward them. Touchdown. A jolt through bone. Tires scream. The aircraft rumbles, slows, turns off the runway, and finally the engines wind down into silence. Only then, in the sudden quiet, does the emotional weight slam in. Gibson climbs down from the cockpit and the airfield smells like grass and oil and sleeplessness. Men approach him with faces that try to hold professionalism and fail. Someone speaks first, voice careful. Sir, did it? Gibson nods once. But the next question is already forming behind the first, the one nobody wants to ask and everybody must. How many are still out there? Because as the sun rises fully over Scampton and the returning aircraft dribble in, one here, one there, damaged, smoking, silent, there are still empty patches of sky where Lancaster should be. And the board in operations, the one that should be filling with landed, is also filling with another word. Overdue. The first thing that hits Gibson isn't applause. It's faces. Men in oil-stained overalls, wafts with clipboards, officers pretending they aren't counting with their eyes. Everyone trying to look normal while their gaze keeps flicking past him, past his crew, toward the approach path again. Because the raid isn't over until the last aircraft lands, or doesn't. In operations, the room smells like cigarette smoke and cold tea. Maps cover the walls. The plotting table is littered with chinograph marks and tiny markers that were moved through the night like pieces on a board game played with human lives. A clerk calls times. Another writes. A WAF plotter reaches for a marker and then stops, pencil hovering, because there's nothing to move for a call sign that hasn't answered in hours. The word overdue isn't shouted. It's said quietly like a superstition. Gibson steps into the debrief and suddenly his boots feel heavy, like they're coated in mud from Germany instead of Scampton's tarmac. He's still wearing the night. It clings to him in the form of soot around seams, the faint smell of cordite and hot engine oil, the dryness in his throat from hours of breathing tension. Someone offers him a chair. Someone offers him a cigarette. He takes the cigarette and forgets to light it. The intelligence officer starts with the questions that keep everything professional. Approach routes. Flak concentrations. Searchlight positions. Height and speed at release. Gibson answers in short sentences. Controlled. Specific. Because if he lets the night pour out in full, it will drown the room. Searchlights came on at Mohne as we began first run. Flak accurate. Increased after first attack. Bomb behavior, correct. Skipped as designed. Detonations underwater. A pencil scratches. Another pencil scratches. Time of breach. Gibson gives it. An header? He gives that too. For a moment, the room tightens around the words. Not celebration, something sharper. A recognition that the plan has crossed a line. It's no longer theoretical. It's now a thing Bomber Command can point at and say, we can do this. Then the next question arrives like an ice bucket. Losses. No one says it with drama. It's asked like a necessary number, a calculation. But everyone in the room feels it land. Because losses aren't an abstraction here. The missing crews have names. They have accents. They have habits. Men you shared a meal with yesterday. Men you nodded at on the dispersal while they climbed into their cockpit and looked back with that half smile that meant, see you after. Now they're just, not here. A runner steps in with an updated list. Paper held carefully as if holding it too roughly might make the news worse. The officer reads the call signs. Some are marked landed. Some damaged. Some, no contact. And the room grows quieter with each no contact, because the phrase is a polite uniform draped over a corpse. Gibson sits very still. His face doesn't change much, but you can almost see the moment his mind starts doing what minds do in grief. Matching code letters to faces. AJ something, that was the crew with the loud laugh. AJ something, that was the pilot who always seemed too calm. Hopgood is already a fixed image in Gibson's head. A Lancaster on fire, still coming in steady. Still releasing. Still trying to do the job while burning. Now the list makes it official. A man enters and says softly that a crashed Lancaster has been reported in the Netherlands. Another has been seen burning near a river. Another is believed to have gone down near the coast. Believed. The most useless word in the world when you want certainty. In the mess hall, the surviving crews drift in like ghosts. Some are talkative, words spilling out as if speaking fast can keep the images from settling. Others say nothing at all, staring into mugs they don't remember filling. A few laugh, sharp, brittle, the laughter of men whose brains are rebooting after too much fear. Someone tries a joke about the cartoon, about how Wallace's spinning drum finally learned to bite. The joke dies in the air because everyone knows what it cost. The empty chairs are loud. A few men keep looking toward the door like a missing crew might still walk in late, grinning, brushing rain from their shoulders, apologizing for being the last ones home. They don't. A station officer steps forward and speaks with the careful tone of a man balancing two truths that refuse to be balanced. You've done what you set out to do. Pause. You've inflicted serious damage. Another pause. We'll have confirmation soon. He doesn't say the other part yet. He waits as if time will make it gentler. Then he says it anyway. We've lost aircraft. We've lost men. And the room swallows hard as one. Far away from Scampton, in another building lit by another single lamp, Barnes Wallace is waiting for word like a man waiting outside an operating theater. He's not wearing a flying suit. He doesn't smell like fuel. His war has been paper and persuasion and the exhausting grind of being dismissed by men who believed only in the familiar. When the message finally arrives, it comes in pieces. First, the Mohne breached. Second, the Eder breached. For a flicker of time, something inside him lifts. Relief, vindication, the sheer release of seeing the mathematics behave in the real world. And then the casualties. The missing. The dead. The faces he's met only briefly, the crews who smiled at him politely while he talked about spin and distance and pressure as if the war could be reduced to variables. Those variables had names. Wallace's expression doesn't become dramatic. It becomes older. As if the news has added weight to his bones. He sits down, not because he's weak but because the body knows when something has changed permanently. There's a kind of guilt that comes with being right in wartime. Because being right means people trusted you. And trust in this context is lethal. Back at Scampton, dawn has fully arrived. The airfield is bright enough now to show damage clearly, bullet holes, torn fabric, scorched paint, oil streaks. Aircraft that landed are suddenly less impressive and more pathetic in daylight, wounded animals that somehow made it back. Gibson walks along the line of returning crews, speaking to men with hollow eyes, men who keep rubbing their hands as if trying to get rid of the feeling of the controls. He doesn't congratulate anyone. Not yet. Feels wrong. Instead he asks simple questions. How are you? Any injuries? Did you see so-and-so? And every time the answer is no, he files it away like a stone placed on a growing pile. A staff officer approaches him with a new set of instructions, already thinking about what comes next. Reconnaissance. Damage assessment. How quickly the Germans can repair. Whether the flood's impact will last weeks or months. Whether another raid is needed. Gibson listens and you can almost see the shift behind his eyes. Because now he understands the trap. Success doesn't end a mission. Success creates the next one. And somewhere deep in Bomber Command, someone is already thinking. If 617 Squadron can do the impossible once, why not again? Gibson looks out over the airfield. Over the gaps where aircraft should be parked. Over the crews who came back and the ones who didn't. He inhales cold morning air and it tastes like metal. Then he speaks quietly, almost to himself, the kind of sentence you don't say unless you know you're about to carry it. They'll ask us to do it again. And the terrifying thing is, he's right. Gibson leaves the mess and walks back toward operations, and the airfield feels too bright. Daylight has a way of stripping romance from everything. The Lancasters that returned look battered now, streaked with oil, peppered with holes you can put your fingers through. Ground crew move around them like surgeons after a brutal night, touching damage with careful hands, shaking heads, murmuring to each other in low voices. Somewhere near a hard stand, a mechanic runs a palm along a jagged tear in metal, then pulls his hand back as if it burned him. Bloody hell. It's not admiration. It's disbelief. Because the aircraft shouldn't have made it home like this. Inside operations the phones won't stop. Messages arrive in bursts. Reconnaissance reports. Intercepts. Rumors traveling faster than truth. Every voice wants the same thing. Confirmation. The RAF does not celebrate a miracle until a photograph proves it happened. And when the first photographic intelligence arrives, it lands like a weight on the table. A strip of images, gray and grainy but unmistakable. A dam with a missing bite. Water streaming where there should only be concrete. Men lean in, close enough to fog the glossy paper with their breath. Someone taps the breach with a finger as if touching it makes it more real. There it is. The cartoon. The spinning drum. The idea that made men smirk. Now it's a hole big enough to change a valley. The room exhales. And then the machinery of war takes over. The questions shift instantly from did it work, to what did it do? How long will it take the Germans to repair? How much power did they lose? How badly are the canals affected? How many factories will stop? Someone starts talking about the Ruhr like it's a set of pipes that can be choked. Someone else talks about forced labor and concrete, about how quickly the Germans can throw bodies at a problem and make it go away. And that's the uncomfortable truth sitting under the photographs. Destruction is not always permanent. But death is. Across the channel Germany is also demanding a story. The dams are not just infrastructure. They are symbols of order and control. When they fail they don't merely flood valleys, they flood confidence. Officials scramble to contain panic, to reassure, to explain how this happened without admitting that the British just reached into the heart of the Reich and tore something open with a weapon that wasn't supposed to exist. Engineers arrive first. Then soldiers. Then workers, thousands of them, marched and trucked in to shovel mud, clear debris, build temporary bridges, pour concrete. The repair effort is relentless because the Ruhr is not allowed to pause. Factories cannot wait for grief. And downriver, as bodies are pulled from wreckage and people stare at what used to be their homes, the war offers no apology. It simply moves on to the next demand. Back at Scampton, the survivors are asked to become characters. A man who flew through searchlights and flak at 60 feet, on a mission that sounds like fiction, does not get to quietly go back to his bunk and sleep. He is summoned, interviewed, photographed. He is told to stand up straight because someone wants to capture the look of victory. Some crews give crisp statements. Some refuse to talk, mouths tight, eyes far away. Because how do you say, out loud, that you watched another Lancaster burn in a valley and still had to continue your run? Gibson is pushed into the center of it, the figure everyone can point at. He handles it with the same controlled precision he used in the cockpit. He doesn't boast. He doesn't dramatize. He gives facts. But when he's alone, the control slips in small ways. A longer stare at the empty hardstands. A pause when he hears a familiar laugh and realizes it belongs to the wrong man. A moment in the corridor outside operations where he stops, hand on the wall, eyes closed, just breathing, because the body finally remembers it almost died. And Barnes Wallace, when he is told in full, cannot hold himself together the way officers can. He listens to the confirmation. The dams breached. The plan proven. Then he listens to the casualty list. And it breaks him in a way the war never broke the men with medals. Wallace is not built for compartmentalizing death. He is built for obsessing over cause and effect, and now the effect has faces. He weeps. Not for vindication. Not because he's proud. Because the success of his idea required men to fly into a valley of guns and light and come out as missing names on a board. The story the public will hear is clean and dramatic. A daring raid. A new squadron. A brilliant invention. A blow struck at German industry. The story the men at Scampton live with is messy. It has soot and screaming engines and the glow of burning aircraft. It has the moment your radio goes silent and you keep flying anyway. And the war doesn't let them sit with it for long. Within hours, planning meetings are already happening. Not about whether the raid was morally complicated, not about whether the water killed people who weren't soldiers. About results. About whether the Germans can rebuild quickly. About whether the next, impossible target exists, and whether 617 Squadron is now the tool for it. Gibson stands in one of those meetings and hears someone say calmly as if it's a simple logistical fact. If it worked once, we can do it again. And there it is. The trap he sensed. Success turns into expectation. Expectation turns into another night, another valley, another set of men who will take off because someone in a bright office believes the math will hold. Gibson doesn't argue. He just looks at the map on the table, at the lines and circles that pretend war is clean. Then he turns slightly, glancing through the window toward the dispersal. Where the aircraft sit. Where the empty hardstands sit too. And in that quiet moment, a new realization settles over him like frost. 617 Squadron has become a legend overnight. Which means they are about to be used like one. In the weeks that follow, the story of the raid spreads the way stories always do in war. First as rumor. Then as official statement. Then as myth. Newspapers talk about daring. About precision. About the night Britain reached into Germany's industrial heart and twisted. Men in pubs lift glasses to crews they've never met. People point at photographs of the breached dams and feel for a moment that the war is moving in the right direction. And somewhere behind the headlines the truth keeps breathing. The industrial impact is real, but not endless. Repairs are started quickly, patched quickly, driven forward by brute force and urgent necessity. The Ruhr is wounded, not dead. The war machine stutters, then finds its rhythm again. Which means the raid becomes something else. A message. A shock. A proof that no wall is safe if the enemy is willing to pay the cost. For 617 Squadron, that proof changes everything. They are no longer just another bomber unit. They are the specialists. The men sent when ordinary bombing can't do the job. When the target is too hard, too protected, too important to leave to chance. And that kind of reputation is dangerous. Because it follows you into every briefing room. It follows you onto every runway. It becomes a weight you carry before you even climb into the cockpit. Guy Gibson carries it too, whether he wants to or not. On the outside he becomes the face of the raid. Commendations, ceremonies, the formal language of honor that tries to make sense of chaos. He is praised for leadership, for calm, for courage. On the inside he becomes the man who watched Hopgood burn and kept talking on the radio anyway. If you listen closely to men who survive nights like that, you learn a strange truth. They don't remember the roar of the crowd. They remember the silence of a call sign that never answers. Barnes Wallace keeps working. He cannot stop. He is one of those minds that cannot rest inside the knowledge of what it created. Instead he pushes forward, driven by the same force that birthed the bouncing bomb in the first place. If the war demands miracles he will try to build them. And the next miracles will be heavier, deeper, more absolute. Weapons meant to crack concrete and steel from great height. Bombs designed to break what seems unbreakable, the same obsession wearing a different shape. But the image that haunts him is not a drawing. It's a night valley lit by searchlights. A Lancaster on fire, still coming in steady. A flood that cannot distinguish between a factory and a home. And that's the uncomfortable heartbeat under Operation Chastise, the thing a high-end documentary can't polish away. It was brilliant. It was brutal. It was both at the same time. When you look back at that night, it's tempting to treat it like a clean turning point, a single strike that reshaped the war. The truth is more human. The raid did not win the war. It did not collapse German industry overnight. But it did something that mattered in the way warfare often matters. It proved that imagination can be a weapon. And it proved that the price of imagination is paid by flesh and bone. Years later, when people say the phrase bouncing bomb, they often picture the physics first. The cleverness. The skip across the surface. The way it defeated nets and pressed against concrete like it had a mind. But if you were there, if you were in the cockpit with the canopy glowing from searchlights, you would remember something else before the math. You would remember the feeling of flying so low you could almost touch the water. The moment your bomb dropped away and you became lighter and more vulnerable. The sound of flak so close it made your teeth hurt. The way your hands had to stay steady even when your body wanted to flinch. Because that was the real miracle. Not that a spinning bomb could bounce. That men could keep flying straight while the night tried to tear them apart. And in the end, that's why the title fits. Why, cartoon becomes Flood. Because the war doesn't care what you call an idea. It only cares what happens when the idea meets the world. Concrete blinked. Water won. Men paid. And a squadron, born for one impossible job, walked out of the night carrying a legend, and the shadow that comes with it. Indy.